the Viet Cong were very, very clever. They made use of common materials. They were very observant as to the behaviors of the United States military, and they tried to take advantage of our behavior and take advantage of every type of material that they could. They included things like homemade hand grenades, where they would obtain United States beer cans, aluminum beer cans, and fill them with black powder and detonators. The detonators, for the most part, came from either Russia or from China, and they were typical detonators used for hand grenades or other explosive devices. They used these homemade hand grenades in a variety of ways. They would place them next to found ammunition, like an artillery shell that didn't explode when it hit, and the artillery shell would be laying on the ground, and next to it, but disguised or covered in some way, would be this hand grenade type device, rigged so that if you moved the artillery shell, and then the hand grenade would detonate. They would split bamboo, the stalk of the bamboo plant. They would split it and put the grenade in between the two halves of the stalk. And you wonder how that would happen. Bamboo, if you split it and look at the inside, it's hollow, not like wood that grows here in the United States, which is, when it's healthy, has a dense inner part. But bamboo is hollow, and so they would select the bamboo stalk, they would cut it, open it up, put the grenade in, close the bamboo around the grenade, so that now the bamboo looks like the whole vegetative patch, and then they would use a tripwire and string that across the trail some way. You know, when we see the movies, typically the spring wires or the spring traps are down near the ground, and the idea is that as you walk by, you catch it with your foot. Well, one of the tricks that the Viet Cong used was to put them shoulder high, head high, neck high, and the bamboo a lot of times would, in its young variety, would lean over, and the bigger stalks would stand taller. And so they would put the booby traps in the bigger stalks, and then they would arrange the younger stalks to lean over the trail, and the Americans coming through would, you know, typically swipe with an arm to move the bamboo or move it out of the way using the rifle, all the while looking ahead. We were trained to look ahead, you know, for any signs of the enemy. And so we would lose the opportunity to see this tripwire, which for the most part was a very thin thread, nylon or something like that. And by moving this young bamboo out of the way, we triggered the grenade. They used things like deadfalls, where they would take a long stalk of material and they would put a board in it, and they would put wooden pegs through this board, and then they would sharpen the ends of the wooden pegs, and they would put feces, human or water buffalo or some other kind of feces, smear it all on the wooden pegs, and put those in the air with some stones, some rocks, so that it had some weight. And they were set up with a tripwire or trip string kind of thing, and if you hit that string, it released a little keeper piece, and this thing would swing down, and the idea was it would come down and catch you in the face or the neck or the chest, and inflict some damage that way. They weren't so much interested in killing us with the booby traps as they were interested in hurting us, because they knew that an injured Marine required 2 or 3 people to take care of him. A dead Marine required 1 person to take care of him. That's Graves registration person. And so their goal, the VC goal, was to cause as much damage as they could to slow us down or debilitate us. And so they were very clever in that regard. The booby trap that caught me was a foot trap, about a shoebox size hole in the ground covered with a little bamboo mat, and it had one of these hand grenade, beer can hand grenades in the bottom. And when I stepped in this trap, or stepped on the trap, I felt the bamboo, I felt the surface begin to go away. And we'd been trained to pull back away from those or to step off of them. And I did that, but I threw myself off balance. And as I did that, my head came over the hole. And when this thing blew up, it was like me standing on top of a smokestack and looking into the smokestack with everything coming up. The force was directed upward, and I was engulfed in the fireball, and so I suffered burns and lacerations from the metal fragments from the can, and dirt, bamboo pieces. All of that came up, took me mostly in my neck and face, damage to my eyes and my ears. I had some fragmentation wounds to my hands and arms, but those wounds weren't as serious. They also would put these explosive devices around what was considered to be attractive things. Americans are pretty curious. And I probably shouldn't say this, but in some ways we were there kind of as sightseers and tourists. It's a brand new country, brand new culture, a different way of life, and a lot of things were pretty interesting, just because of the nature of what they were and where they were. And you wonder, what is this thing? What does it do? What significance does it have for the family? And the Viet Cong paid attention to that, and so they booby trapped some of these things. And typically the tip-off was this nice, bright, shiny thing sitting in a grass shack, a shack made of not a shack, but a house made of bamboo poles with palm leaves and elephant grass. And there'd be a little shelf, and it'd be pretty empty of anything, except here's this bright, shiny thing sitting there. It's kind of unusual that all the other possessions would be gone and that bright, shiny thing was there. So that was a tip to us. But typically those were booby trapped. One thing we used to do in that area, our work was in rice paddies. The fields were very flat and very extensive, several hundred acres. And the rice paddies are divided by dikes of earth. And we used to walk on those earthen dikes because it was dry. If you get down in the rice paddy, it's wet. And the clay soil and the water made it real ooey-gooey and sticky and altogether unpleasant. Well, the Viet Cong noticed that the Americans walked on these dikes on top. So they began to set their booby traps in the dikes. And so we noticed that and made an adjustment. We said, well, okay, we don't like walking in the mud, but we're going to walk in the mud to avoid the booby traps which are on the dikes. So now we get in the mud and walking next to the dike rather than on it. So the VC noticed this. So now what they start doing, in the mud they begin to put fungi sticks, which are pieces of bamboo sharpened at one end, dipped in feces again. That was one of their favorite chemicals. And they would stick these pieces of bamboo in the rice paddy under the surface of the water, but in such a way that as you would walk along, these things would come up either through your shoe, the sole of the shoe, or they would come up along the side of your leg and gouge the skin of your lower leg or get into your foot. And you couldn't see them. I mean, they were there. And they weren't always right next to the dike. Sometimes they moved them out too. So moving a little away from the dike didn't really help in some cases. They were very, very clever. Those were the kinds of things that we experienced.